Listeners, are you ready for your monthly literary adventure? We now have the BFF Book Club. Join us each month to explore a new book. After reading, connect with fellow book lovers and meet the author in a live interview. Can't make it live? Don't worry. We'll send you the recording. You can find all the upcoming book club selections at www.bookishflights.com/read/BFF book club. Hi, I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Desiree Petrich. Desiree is a best-selling author, speaker, team development facilitator, and host of the Lead with Confidence podcast. She is the founder and CEO of Intentional Action, and her mission is to help teams learn and grow together and to help you build a life you love by taking control of what you can control. She will share her story of love, loss, and leadership to inspire and encourage you to take responsibility for unlocking your potential. Desiree fully believes that you can have the best parts of your day at home and at work. Welcome to the show, Desiree.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you. Well, I feel like this is a great bio about you, but I also feel like you're so much more than that. So can you tell us about who you are?
Yes. Well, first off, I am a wife and a mom. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old.
Okay.
So my days revolve around what they are doing for the day. But in the times that they are not at home, I own a leadership development company. I'm recording podcasts. I'm doing a lot of reading. I also love to exercise. So I spend a lot of time walking, or my husband built me a she shed in the backyard.
I
So
love it.
yeah, I love doing all the things, and community is one of my favorite pieces of my business. So always at networking events and always on a virtual coffee with someone from across the world.
I love that. I was going to say, well, first off, when you said like you love networking and getting out to them, I'm like, how do you do that with your 2 and 4-year-old? But then you added virtual. I'm like, okay, that makes it a little bit more attainable in our lifestyle.
Yes.
So I know how busy kids can be. And so it is really hard to find that time to make things work. Do you work out in your she shed?
I don't.
Okay.
So I can't. First off, I live in Minnesota, so it's
Oh yeah.
-30 half of the year and it's 90 the other half of the year. So it's like a cold and a hot box, depending on
Yeah.
what time of the year you're in there. And I just deal with it for working out because it's nice to have my own space. But I am currently in my dining room with all of my kids' toys as my background. So
Yeah. It's a little comfort zone there for you. I'm from the Midwest originally, so I understand those extremes of temperature there on both sides. So, well, why don't you tell us? You have written a book now called Taking Intentional Action. Can you tell us about it?
I would love to tell you about it. It was a fast-tracked project. I did not intend on writing a book this early on. I think I started less than 9 months after I started my company. But I actually started my company because my mom passed away in 2022. And I was like, I started this company because I have a mission to help people. And I want to tell the story about my mom in more than just a soundbite. Because
Yeah,
if you were to listen to my podcast, if you were to hear me talk about it, it's like it can almost sound cold because I've said it so many times and
sure.
I've kind of, they say don't talk about something until you have a scab. I definitely have a scab on about it.
Yeah,
And so I said, I want people to know the story of love and loss behind it. I want people to understand like my mindset throughout the whole thing and essentially why I didn't break because she had passed away. She passed away just 3 months after my son was born, 2 months after he got home from the NICU. So it was like
wow.
there was just this flurry of horrible things that happened. And somehow I came out on the other side stronger. And so I wrote a book about it. I wrote a book about what I had done prior to anything bad happening to kind of almost set myself up, even though I didn't know what I was preparing for. And then the mindset and the choices, decisions along the way that kind of helped me to feel like I was still living a life of purpose even after all of that tragedy and loss.
Yeah, I imagine that sent your world into a tailspin when all of that happens.
It did. And I mean, my son was born during a Minnesota blizzard, so that's not unusual for us. But at the same time, my daughter, when she was born, everything was perfect and she got to come home that day. So we didn't expect anything different.
Yeah.
And then when he wasn't able to get to the NICU because of the weather, and then he almost died and he stayed in the NICU for a month. And 24 hours later, my mom had a stroke. Like it was, I think we were mostly just in shock. Like nothing bad has ever happened to my husband or I. And all of a sudden it was like bam, bam, bam. So yeah, tailspin is a very accurate way of describing what happened.
Yeah. And on top of the sleepless nights that you have with a baby and the sleep deprivation, and then just all of that's thrown onto your plate. So I was really like, it sounds like I was imagining you were going to tell me this was more of a business type book, but this is truly a personal story.
Oh, absolutely. I it's funny you say that because I wrote the first three chapters first. I tried to write it in order. And by the time I got to the last chapter of the book and then reread it, I was like, who is this person talking? This is not me. It's not in my voice. It doesn't have my sarcasm. It doesn't hold the message that I wanted to share. And so I ended up rewriting the first few chapters of the book because it is a personal story. And I found myself almost filtering what I said because I knew there was going to be other people on the other side of the publishing process that weren't going to like what I had to say. Um, but I had to go through that process of being like, I don't care. I want to
Yeah.
get my story out. It was the whole point. And so did that. But it is a business book, a leadership book in the sense of it goes through this process of how do you evaluate your excuses? What's holding you back? Then it's a framework of how do you build a life that you chose as opposed to one that was kind of designed for you if you were to just let life happen around you. But I am a leadership development coach, speaker, trainer. And so, I had to put some things in there about that. I'm a DISC consultant. So there's a lot of personality style profiling. How do you get along with people with different personality profiles? And all of these different pieces that I've seen in the workplace that ultimately stems from how well we know ourselves at home and in
Yeah.
our personal life. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. And exactly to your point, right? Is I mean, we could put on a different face, right? Like we have our face at home and then we have our face at work, but at the same token, we're still coming in with all of our experiences that we're having in our life as well. So we're not completely isolated when we go to work. We still have this background that we're all coming from and interacting from. Did you find that I imagine this book was also painful to write, having your personal story in it, but did you find there was healing that came from it as well?
I think so. I think it was partly just this thought in my head of who am I to deserve to still be happy? And that seems like a weird thing to say, or she was my best friend. Why am I happy? It doesn't make sense. I should be broken. You almost feel guilty when you lose someone that you could keep moving on. And so writing the book and going through that process and laying it all out and then rereading it, I was like, wow, like I did this. I thought these things. I'm proud of myself. Like all of these thoughts and almost acceptance of the way that I handled everything started to come through even into my own mind.
Yeah.
Whereas before it wasn't that way. So yeah, I think so. I think there was a lot of healing in it, even yeah, just my mindset around it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I lost my dad. It'll be 14 years ago, like here coming up in a month, and I had to tell myself a lot that like he wouldn't want me to be wallowing in sorrow and in grief either, right? Like he would want to see me shine in this world. And so
Mhm.
I what you when you said that about how like getting to be happy after this, I think that resonates with me a lot because I've been on that path too and just I have to think that nope, my dad wouldn't want me doing that.
Yeah. Well, and part of the story is about my mom and my mom's work life. So I wrestled a lot with, am I allowed to tell her story in this
True.
book when she's not here to give me permission? And I really struggled with that because I have a different recollection of my mom's story than my sisters do, or than my dad does, or than her sister did. So it's like, am I allowed to tell my version of the story? Am I supposed to get all these other pieces? Should I just leave it out completely? And in the end, I wrote my version of it, keeping out anything that I knew would directly offend someone.
Sure.
But then I sent it to one of my mom's best friends and I said, "Can you read this? Is there anything that could potentially like get misconstrued in the wrong way? Is it going to make her company mad?" All of these different questions. And she helped me tweak a couple of things just to make sure, there wasn't going to be any of that. And in the end, she said, "Your mom was back for a little bit. Like I felt her. I felt her presence just in the way that you wrote about her." And that was like the best thing that could have happened for me. I think that was the icing on the cake of I can be proud of this book. It was like I
Yeah.
told my mom's story in a way that even her best friend thought
Felt her.
did her justice.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I had the chills as you were saying that. So you had started your business and then you're like, okay, I fast tracked. I didn't think I was going to be writing this book. How has that changed your business for you now that you have this?
It's a really interesting question because I would argue to say that it hasn't changed it a lot.
Okay.
But that's on me because I also decided to host a leadership summit directly. I think it was 3 months before the book got published. I had decided I was going to host my first in-person leadership conference. And so by the time the book published, I ended up getting an Amazon best-selling new release. Like that was my number one goal. And now I've essentially just used it for networking. I sold it at my summit. I lead a lot of different programs within companies. So I'll bring a copy and say, "Here, add this to your library. I'd love for you to read it
Yeah.
and reach out if you want to." So I think it's more of an add-on. It's more of like a credential builder and things like that. But that wasn't the goal, I don't think, was to build my company. It'd be great if one day, that's kind of the thing that sets it on the trajectory. But I think the point of the book was to write down what it is that I knew, to write it down so that I can remember it, to write it down so that my kids have a piece of me.
Hmm.
My life up until the age of 30 is now in this book
Yeah.
and it won't change. So there was a lot of different reasons for it. I also happened to meet the perfect editor and publisher that kind of fast tracked it. And
Sure.
so it all just kind of came together.
Absolutely. And I think that I was just talking with a friend who has a book publishing here in a month, and we were looking at the statistic, and I believe it's like under 1% of people have ever written a book. So I think it just sets you apart, right? No matter what field you're in, you're just set apart from people that only 1% of people ever have a book published, or even less. It was like point oh something
Yeah.
of people that have published a book. So that just sets you apart right there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though, because I feel like I live in this world of authors and speakers and coaches and
Yeah.
leadership development individuals, and a lot of them have written books. So it's like, it's kind of a weird statistic to hear because the people that I spend time with all do have a book or aspirations for
They're
a book.
bumping
And I'm
up the
like,
average.
yeah, so it feels like a lot more than that 0.07%. But yeah, hearing, or point 0.7, whatever it is, but hearing that, it's kind of like, yeah, I wrote a book. That's so cool. Like,
Yeah.
I did the thing. So I appreciate
Abs-
that perspective.
Absolutely. I'll email you back. I'll look up the statistic again and I'll send you an email on the exact number, but it was so slim. Like it was crazy.
Yeah.
So, well, what did you learn about yourself through writing?
I really struggled. Like I said, that question kept coming up of why am I okay? Why am I not broken? Why do I still want to stretch and read and exercise? And why did I start a business? I felt at the time, this was probably right about 6 months after she passed away, like I was thriving in a way that I shouldn't have been. And so I started to ask myself the questions like, why do I want to work out? Why do I want to read? What is it something inside of me? Is it a goal I'm trying to reach? I was trying to figure out the motivation behind it. And I realized that it wasn't a motivation for what I wanted going forward. It was a habit that I had created going back. And so when my daughter was 6 months old, I was managing a dementia facility when the pandemic hit.
Okay.
And prior to the pandemic, I was not a great leader. I really struggled. I was 24 when I got hired. I led with the iron fist. I was micromanaging. I was doing all the things that they tell you in leadership books not to do. And then the pandemic happened and I was overweight from, being 6 months postpartum. I didn't feel like I had control of anything. We had no daycare. So my son was a stay-at-home dad. I felt completely lost at work in a facility where the only people I really connected with were the families of the tenants, and they were no longer coming in. Um, and the staff and I just didn't click very well. So the process of getting into personal development, the process of learning to love to exercise, learning to love to read, learning to love to be comfortable in my own body started from a place of a lot of discomfort. But I built and I grew all of these different habits along the way. And it seems strange to say, but like I said, I ended up almost preparing for something bad to happen. By the time I had my son and he ended up in the NICU and my mom passed away, I feel like that's what I learned in the
Yeah.
process of writing the book. It's like it didn't occur to me because it is such a slow process to build your life and to design the life that you want. And it happened so gradually, but I was like, this is a lot. And
Yeah.
again, like it allowed me to say I was proud of myself, which as I don't know if it's a first child thing. I don't know if it's a millennial thing. I don't know what it is, but it's like it's really hard to say that to
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah,
So,
I love that you inadvertently were preparing yourself, right? Like you had no idea what was coming down the pike for you, but you
yeah.
inadvertently were preparing yourself. And I also really appreciate what you're saying about these habits that you created because I've thought similar things about myself, right? We're all faced with tough and difficult situations at some point in our life. And I think we can all look at people we know and people handle it very differently, right? Like some people are able to hold it together. Maybe they're dying on the inside, but they're able to hold it together. And
Mm.
other people fall completely apart. And I'm like, now that I have kids, what can I do to teach my kids to be resilient in the face of these tragedies or the difficulties that unfortunately nowhere's going to come in their life? Do I want that for them? No, but it has been something I've thought about as a parent now of what can I teach my children at this age when they're still in my home, they're under my control. Like what can I teach them to be, to be ready to face these things? And so I
Mm.
appreciate what you're saying because I think even we can apply it in parenthood, right? But creating these good habits and seeing, the fruits of your labors essentially. If you, it stinks to start these things, but once you get doing it, um, and obviously, I think I could learn a lot more from your book as well, but just picking up these little cues that you're saying, because I've had these,
Yeah.
how can I teach my kids resiliency as well?
And if someone asked me, what do I need to do to teach my kids resilience? I would say teach yourself first. Because
Yeah,
I think you can't teach someone something that you don't know
totally.
about, but teaching someone something is the best way to learn. So you have to be reading personal development and listening to podcasts and, having conversations with people who went before you, because as you're learning these things, you can then teach them to your kids and it's going to instill it further and deeper in you.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what my book is. Inside my book is the foundation of self framework, which is daily or self engagement, which is your daily habits,
Okay.
self worth, which is your belief in yourself, and then your self awareness, which is exactly what we're talking about. It's trust and emotional and social intelligence and leadership and all these things that will never, ever fully come to fruition because there is no finish line.
Yeah.
They are things that you will have to continue to build over the course of your life. But if you're not putting intention behind your actions and behind the belief that you have in yourself, you won't be able to grow those other things at the rate that you would hope to. And you won't be able to lead by example for your kids or your employees or your friends or family.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a physical therapist by trade, actually. So I
Mm.
always big believer of like practice what you preach, right? Like I can't go out teaching people how to exercise and like you got to be healthy unless I'm doing it myself. So I totally
Mhm.
hear what you're saying from that perspective. And I think, again, same thing with our kids. Like they have to see the example. We're doing it too.
Mhm.
That's so
And
important.
I fail often. I mean,
Yeah. We're not doing it perfect for sure.
yeah, parenthood is hard, leadership is hard, all the things are hard. I have an entire chapter. It's chapter 6 in my book. It's called Walking into the Wind. And it's essentially about how I broke down. And even while in the process of writing this book, had a moment where I went to the doctor and I said, I'm not losing weight anymore. I don't feel like myself. Give me a pill, give me something. And she's like, what are you actively working towards fixing these things? And I was like, well, no, I guess somewhere along the way, like I kind of forgot about these basics. And so
Yeah.
it's like, it's not something you can do once and then it's in your life forever. It's a daily practice of things that you have to do. And when I wrote that chapter and when I really struggled with my weight going back up after it finally coming down after having my second kid, my chiropractor was like, I think this is good for you. It's like, I think it's really good this is happening to you. And of course, my jaw dropped and I was like, excuse me.
Yeah.
But he said it gives you perspective. It gives you like this understanding, this realization that people go through hard things, even the ones who had seemingly figured it out. And it allows you to have empathy and grace for people in a way that otherwise you wouldn't have had. And so he knew I was, a personal development junkie. So I feel like he understood that he could say that to me and it'd be fine. But yeah, I think part of it too is just being able to ask the hard questions to people and to, maybe say a few hard things in order to hold a mirror up for people.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what my book is too. It's asking you really hard questions, the better questions that we don't always ask ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other part of that too, right, is we can become so busy and just mired in the day to day that we don't take the time to ask those hard questions, right? We just kind of go through the day and, you know,
Mhm.
checking off the boxes, going through the motions of what we need to get done, quote unquote, but really taking, I think, setting aside that time to be able to ask ourselves these hard questions that you're asking in the book is so important too.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things. I always say my superpower is asking kind of hard questions. I always say I'm the mean coach in like the best way because I truly want people to be the best that they can be and to feel the best that they can. And sometimes that just means being the bad guy sometimes.
Yeah. You have
They
good
always
intentions
appreciate me for the
behind.
mean. Exactly.
Yeah. Good intentions behind what you're saying. So,
Yes.
well, now that you have your book out, have you still been writing?
I am very active on LinkedIn. So I spend a lot of time creating content there. Like Friday morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. intending to go to a networking event an hour away, only to figure out that there was no networking event. So I had my hair and my makeup and, everything done, and then had to change back into my sweatpants and like figure out what to do for the day. So I posted about that on LinkedIn and I just talked about my mindset and the process I went through inside of my head, the internal dialogue of like, okay, I'm mad. No reason to be. There's no one to
Yeah.
be mad at other than myself. But here's the thought process that I went through in order to get to this place of like, I was just gifted 3 extra hours. Now, what can I do with them?
Yeah.
And so to answer your question, I write often, but mostly on LinkedIn. There is not currently a second in the works.
Yeah. Well, you never know. All those could come together to be your second project, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I'm also a podcast host. And so I spend a lot of time doing long form content, audio, as opposed to writing as well.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about your podcast as well.
So it's called Lead with Confidence. I have kind of three key phrases: lead with confidence, taking intentional action, and then elevating your influence. And so it's just a podcast about understanding that confidence is a belief in yourself, that at any moment in any challenge, you have the skills and the mindset and the knowledge to succeed. And it's going to be taking a little bit of an evolution here because I do own a leadership development company and I post episodes twice a week. And I am really excited about this concept of helping people elevate their executive presence. What does it mean to have this presence in a corporate environment, in some sort of work environment that says, I am here, I showed up, I want to play the game well, and I want to be the best version of myself that I can be in this environment. So I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so you post episodes twice a week. When can we look
Mhm.
for them? What days do you post?
Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays is this personal development, mastering your mindset, interviewing amazing people who kind of have their own story of success and realizing that everyone has a different version of success.
Sure.
And then Thursdays is this professional development, understanding what executive presence is and how to build teams, how to communicate, how to send an email, all the different things. So
Cool. Okay. And then I'm assuming they can find it on all the major podcasting platforms and
Yeah, absolutely.
okay. Well, we'll have links in the show notes as well where they can find you and your podcast. We'll make sure to include all of those. So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about who you are as a reader. So I obviously know you enjoy reading personal development type books. What other type of books do you enjoy reading?
So funny enough is I've always been an avid reader. I've loved to read my entire life. But I had a goal when I was just married at 21 years old, and I said, I want to read every single Nora Roberts book. There's like 250 of
Yeah.
them. And I think I got pretty close to reading all of them. But like I said, I was probably two-thirds, three-fourths of the way through when COVID hit and ended up needing to shift gears and find personal development. So I had a very narrow understanding of of the fiction genre just because I was looking at maybe two or three fiction writers. But yeah, I've almost completely switched gears into personal development, leadership, and memoirs just because I really love learning about the things that people have learned and are now willing to teach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how in your busyness do you find time to read?
It's funny you asked that because the next podcast episode I plan on recording is how to read more in your busy life. Um, and I read anywhere from 50 to 100 books a year. I just absolutely love it. And when people ask me that question, I have to think, I'm like, I don't know. I
I
actually
just
don't know when I
do.
read. Yeah, I've usually got like 6 or 7 books started at a time, and it can take me anywhere from a week to 6 months to read it, and it just kind of depends on the book. But most of the time, mostly when I read is in bed. I don't have my phone in bed. I leave it in a different room, and I'm reading personal development prior to falling asleep at night. Sometimes it's paragraph before I can't hold my eyes open.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's 20, 30 pages and I just, I'm enveloped in what I'm reading and I don't want to put it down. But when I am really strong in my habits, and really focusing on them, I have a goal of reading for 20 minutes a day. So you can
Nice.
read a book pretty quickly and, when you're reading for 20 minutes a day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, right, of being intentional about it, right? It's just kind of factored in your day and you're intentional that this is on your priority list. I think that that's totally, I agree with you as well. So love it.
Yeah. And there's that argument, do audiobooks count? And I would argue to the death with anyone who says that they don't.
I agree. We
Because
spend just as much time with them.
exactly. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I can go on a walk and listen to this book. Like I can be more productive, while listening and actually engage with it more. I listen to my audiobooks on anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 speed because otherwise I get distracted.
Sure.
But it's like I'm not listening to personal development or leadership often if I'm listening to a book because I like to highlight, I like to take notes.
Yeah.
But memoirs, I love to listen to the author reading them. And then fiction, I would actually prefer to listen because they're telling you a story and they do the accents and I just think it's incredible and it's such a skill set that I wish I had. But
Yeah, it's almost like a mini play, right, of the book where
mhm,
you're getting all of like this audio drama, kind of like an old
yes.
school radio show or something.
Yeah, and Nora Roberts just had the first book of a trilogy come out, but I didn't realize that the next one wasn't out yet. And at the end of the book, they said, keep an eye out for the next one in November of 2024. And I was in my car and literally screamed, no, like I was
Yeah.
so sad.
Did it end
But
on a
yeah,
cliffhanger where you're now
it
like, I
did.
have to
It
know
was like,
what's going to happen?
they went into the mirror and then it ended. I was like, well, that sucks.
Yeah. Now I gotta wait.
Yeah, it's okay. November will come quickly. It's fine.
Absolutely. Well, you have been so gracious to bring a book flight with you today as well. Can you tell us about how you chose these books?
I'm gonna be honest with you. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. To narrow down over 400 books into three of my favorites was absolutely impossible. But what I did was I said, what are the books or the authors that have impacted me the most? And the very first personal development book I ever read was Finish by John Acuff, who
Yep.
happens to be one of my favorite authors. I love his podcast. I traveled to hear him speak. I got a picture with him. He signed a book for me. Um, So I think something about a good book is that it will make you fall in love not only with the content of the book, but the author and the author's world and the way that they think. And so John Acuff happens to be one, but Finish was the book I was reading when I finished my very first workout program from day one to the end of the 6 weeks. It was the book I was reading when I started, my 60 to 100 books a year. It was that book for me. It was the catalyst to like everything else that I was doing.
Yeah.
I don't even know if the book's any good. I've reread it a couple of times, but I'm so in love with like the concept of it that I'm assuming it's fantastic. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had the effect on me that it did. But it's like it almost doesn't even matter because it will
Yeah.
just forever be that book that I will recommend to people. It had that power for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that you've gone back and reread it too, because I've said, had the same favorite book and running for probably 8 years since I've read it. It's probably been 8 years. And I've always wondered that, like, if I were to go back and read it today, would I still call this my favorite book? But I haven't done it because I almost don't want anything else to like usurp its position because I've been saying it for so long. It's my favorite
What
book.
is it?
It's The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna.
I haven't read that one, but I just read her newest book and it was
The Women.
so good. Oh my gosh. I laughed, I cried. I actually listened to it, but for anyone who hasn't read that,
Yeah, I
highly,
cry in
highly
all
recommend
her
it.
books. And
Oh,
but yeah, I interviewed her for that before that book came out, and it was my bucket list moment for the podcast. That's for sure.
that's incredible.
So,
John Acuff is one of those people I'm like, when I get him
yeah.
as an interviewee on my podcast, I will know I have made it.
Exactly. You got to have your dream list for sure.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. So that's interesting. If you ever reread it, I want to know.
yeah, I'll send you a message. It's been like, okay, I should go back, but you know how our list is always evolving of we have guests coming on, and so you want to read for those episodes. And so it's a matter of
Mhm.
finding the time to do it too.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Maybe you could listen to it if you've read it physically the first
I
time,
actually
maybe listening to
listened,
it.
I think, as
Did
the
you?
first, yeah, it was an audiobook, but I think that's when I really, it just launched. I was my son like 19 months old, and maybe I was pregnant with our second, but it was what launched me into audiobooks too. So that probably is a huge catalyst of it. Just opened this whole world of reading to me that despite the busyness of the days, I could still get books in. So maybe
Mhm.
that's the draw of it too, outside of the fantastic story that it was.
Yeah. Well, and this is a little bit of a segue. I'll try and make it quick, but I almost feel guilty listening to fiction on Audible and then claiming that I read as many books as I have because I'm like, I can listen to a 17-hour fiction book in 2 days.
Yeah.
So I'm like, and realistically, I could read 150 books if I was counting those. So mostly when I say that I read 60 books a year, it's I read a personal development book and that's what I count. I don't even list out the ones I listen
Oh,
to on
girl, you
Audible
got to
because I'm like,
count them all.
I know, but I'm like, I almost feel guilty because I listen to them so quickly. I just can't put them down. Like I go on extra walks and I actually do the dishes where my
Yeah.
husband would normally do them because I'm like, I want to listen to my book. And so, but yeah,
Yeah.
anyway.
I say my
Um,
house is infinitely cleaner because of audiobooks. So,
uh-huh.
mhm, yeah,
100%.
I
Yeah,
feel that.
podcasts for me too do that.
Yeah.
And the next book on my book
Yeah.
flight is actually because of this same concept. I read The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin, and that's actually not the book that I chose of hers because when I said which of her books had the most impact on me, it was
Yeah.
Better Than Before, which
Okay.
is her book about habit change. How do you go from having a habit that you don't want and using one of her many different strategies to then shifting it into a habit that you do want or a habit that fits more into your lifestyle or whatever it might look like. But it was that same concept of I read The Happiness Project. She pulled me in. I was hanging on every word she said. I'm like, I need to be in her world. Her podcast was the very first one I ever listened to. I still listen to it 3 times a week when they drop
Nice.
episodes. Like I will forever be in her world. And the four tendencies, which is her personality framework that she developed, is something that I use almost every day in my leadership development company. So I
Cool.
highly recommend all of her books.
Yeah, I've only read The Happiness Project, so now I'll be interested to see. I got to go dig into some of her backlist, it sounds like.
Yes, yes. Her, like I said, the four tendencies, Better Than Before, are a couple of my favorites. And I'm actually I felt like I needed just a brain refresh and to not read any personal development, leadership, or
Sure.
fiction for a little while. And so I was like, what can I read? And she has this book called Outer Order, Inner Calm, which is literally just a list of like, if you want to create a more hospitable living environment, these are some things you can do. And she just lists a bunch of different things. So that's what I'm currently reading.
Oh, fun. So like almost little like snippets, right? Like little tidbits of
Yes.
information. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I don't know that I retain any of it, but it's just that perfect book that like you don't have to think too hard about. And I just really needed that. I had COVID last week and completely fell out of all of my habits for the week. So I was like,
Yeah.
how can I get myself back into this so that I can go hard on it again? But um, for my final book, this one I really struggled with because this author happens to only have one book, but it was my favorite book of 2023. And it kind of set off the catalyst for why I felt like I wanted to read my own book. And it's Chasing the Bright Side by Jess Ekstrom.
Okay.
She started a company in college called Headbands for Hope. And she went through all of these trials and errors and just feelings of like, I can't do this. And ultimately got herself through to the point where she started a second company called Mic Drop Workshop. And she helps women speakers become better speakers, getting paid speakers, and just trying to open up that door for women in that keynote speaking area. And there was something about the way that she wrote. Honestly, I think if you read her book and my book back to back, they'd have kind of a similar voice because that's how big of an impact the way that she told her story on
Wow.
me.
Yeah. That's amazing. I think, and I was thinking that when you said about your book, how like it maybe necessarily hasn't changed your business. I think that it gives people the personal side of you, though. It sounds like
Mhm.
as well, like within the framework of how this is how I've applied it to my life. So it gives you like this credibility, right? Of like, here's what I went through and here's how I did it. And, but they're also getting to know you. And I think that's so important in this like virtual day and age of we're not necessarily, it's not our neighbors that we're always interacting with. It's these people across the
Mm.
country or across the globe, like you were saying, these virtual networking events you attend. I think it's so important to have that personal component to it as well.
It is. And honestly, people have told me, like, I read it in your voice because they listen to my podcast or they
Yeah.
know me personally. And they said it was so personal that I feel like you were telling me a story. I read it in your voice. So now people are like, when are you doing the audiobook? I actually want to hear it in your voice. But I found that I talk very quickly. I don't know if you've noticed as we're sitting here, but when I read at two times the speed. Like
Yeah.
I really struggle to slow down, add pauses, add breaks, take a breath. So I've been putting off the audiobook version for almost 6 months now. I just have to do it and get it over with.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, there's a big contingent of people out there listening. So that would be
Mhm.
amazing for them to have that access.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One very soon. My goal is by the end of the year, it will at least be recorded. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for bringing these books with you as well for the book flight. These are all, I've heard some of the names, but I haven't read any of these titles. So I'll definitely be adding
mhm.
them to my TBR. How I love to end our show here is with our bonus pairings. And these are just a speed round of questions. So you can answer these really quick. Are you a rereader?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And what's one book you've read that has changed your life?
I would say Finish and Chasing the Bright Side happen to be two of them that have absolutely changed my life.
Awesome. Where is your favorite place to read?
In my bed.
Nice. And then lastly, what are you reading next?
That's a great question. Currently, I have Patrick Lencioni is another one of my favorite
Yeah.
authors. It was really hard for me to not put one of his books on my list, but with my leadership development company, I am certified in a couple of his programs. So I have his book, The Motive, next on my
Okay.
list.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
This was so much fun. No one ever wants to talk about books with me.
I'm here. I'm your girl.
Yes. I love it. No, thank you for having me. This was so fun.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Desiree Petrich. You can find a full list of the books that we've talked about today at bookishflights.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.